For 6 centuries, the Ottoman name dominated the map, spanning from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia and the snowy plains of Crimea. At its height, this single monarchy governed the intersection of 7 seas and 3 continents. The decisions made by this empire still dictate the borders of today's Middle East. From the ongoing tensions in Palestine to the political structure of the modern Muslim world, we live in a landscape defined by the Ottoman collapse. This global power began as a displaced tribe of just a few hundred tenths. In the late 13th century, they were refugees, fleeing westward to escape the towers of human skulls left in the wake of the Mongol invasion. Their leader, Ertugrul, chose to settle in Sogut, a tiny region in western Anatolia. It was a high-stakes location, positioned precisely between the encroaching Mongol armies and the crusaders of the Byzantine Empire. Ertugrul's son Osman envisioned a destiny far beyond this small settlement. He dreamed of a tree bursting from his chest, its branches shadowing the entire world, and its roots drawing from the world's great rivers. This vision functioned as a powerful legitimizing myth. It transformed a band of fleeing refugees into a society convinced of its own manifest destiny, providing the ideological drive needed for endless territorial expansion. The early expansion was rapid but fragile. Sultan Mehmed, the Thunderbolt, conquered vast territories across 2 continents, only to be crushed and captured by Timur the Lame at the Battle of Ankara. His defeat left the empire in a decade-long vacuum of power and civil war. Recovering from such a total collapse is a rarity in history. Yet Sultans Mehmed I and Murad II managed to rebuild the state and defeat the combined armies of Europe at Varna and Kosovo, proving the Ottoman military could survive even the loss of its king. Murad's son, Mehmed II, inherited a state that was split between Europe and Asia. He became obsessed with taking Constantinople, the city that sat like a dagger in the middle of his empire. For Mehmed, conquering the Roman capital was the only way to prove his capability after a failed early stint on the throne. To bypass the massive iron chain guarding the harbor, Mehmed ordered his men to smear wooden planks with fat and oil. Over a single night, 70 Ottoman warships were dragged across land and launched into the Golden Horn, surrounding the city from a side the Byzantines thought was impossible to reach. In May 1453, the ancient Roman walls finally breached. The 21-year-old Sultan rode into the city and performed his first prostration in the Hagia Sophia, signaling the end of the Eastern Roman Empire. Conquering Constantinople gave the Ottomans a central administrative hub and control over the primary trade routes between East and West, establishing them as the dominant force in the Mediterranean. This expansion was powered by a unique meritocracy called the Devshirme. Talented boys from conquered lands were brought to the capital, converted to Islam, and trained as the Janissaries, a salaried standing army that answered only to the Sultan. Stability at the top was maintained through the law of fratricide. To prevent civil wars between rival heirs, it became legal for a new sultan to execute his brothers, ensuring the survival of the state through a single unchallenged authority. Sultan Selim I used this power to pivot the empire's focus toward the east. In just 8 years, he conquered Egypt and Syria, took control of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and officially transferred the Caliphate to the Ottoman dynasty. This era reached its cultural peak under Suleiman the Magnificent. While his armies reached Vienna, his architect, Mimar Sinan, designed the massive mosques and domes that still serve as the architectural trademark of Istanbul today.
But inside the palace, a conspiracy was growing. Suleiman's favorite queen, Hurrem, successfully manipulated the Sultan into executing his most capable son and heir, Prince Mustafa, to clear a path for her own children. Mustafa's execution signaled a shift where palace intrigue began to outweigh military and administrative merit. The throne eventually passed to less capable heirs, beginning a slow transition from leadership in the field to isolation in the palace. By the 17th century, the empire replaced fratricide with the cage. Princes were no longer killed, but they were imprisoned in isolated palace rooms for decades. Men who had never seen the outside world were suddenly taken from these cells and placed on the throne, leading to a string of mentally unstable and ineffective rulers. The Janissaries, once the world's most disciplined army, devolved into a political mafia. They became kingmakers who could remove any sultan who threatened their privileges, culminating in the brutal public humiliation and murder of Sultan Osman II. As the Ottoman court turned inward, Europe experienced a scientific and commercial revolution. New maritime routes to the Americas and India meant trade no longer had to pass through Ottoman territory, draining the imperial treasury. The empire also fell behind technologically. While the printing press spread knowledge across Europe, the Ottoman authorities issued fatwas banning the technology for centuries, effectively cutting their population off from modern scientific advancements. Sultan Mehmed II attempted a desperate course correction in 1826. In an event called the Auspicious Incident, he used modern cannons to slaughter the Janissary Corps in their barracks, finally ending the influence of the old military elite. Mahmud's purge came too late to bridge the gap with the West. With a hollowed-out treasury and rebelling provinces, the Ottoman state could no longer withstand the pressures from its European neighbors, earning it the title of the Sick Man of Europe. In the late 19th century, Sultan Abdul Hamid II tried to counter the rising tide of European-style nationalism by emphasizing a collective Islamic identity. He presented himself as the caliph of all Muslims to hold his diverse, multinational empire together. Abdul Hamid was eventually overthrown by the Young Turks, a group of Western-educated military officers. Their inexperienced leadership and Turkish nationalist fervor led them to make a fatal gamble, entering the First World War on the side of Germany. Despite their decline, Ottoman soldiers fought with staggering bravery. At Gallipoli, a commander named Mustafa Kemal led a defense that successfully blocked a massive British naval invasion, though it cost the empire its remaining resources. While the Ottomans held the trenches, Britain struck from behind. They convinced Sharif Hussein of Mecca to launch the Arab Revolt, promising him a unified Arab kingdom in exchange for rebelling against the Sultan. But the British had already signed the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement with France. They ignored their promises, dividing the Middle East into European spheres. These penciled lines created the borders of modern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Palestine, fueling a century of conflict. Following the war, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk led a war of independence to save the Turkish heartland. In 1924, he took the final step toward modernization and officially abolished the 1,300-year-old institution of the Caliphate, exiling the last Ottoman royals. The Ottoman Empire fell not just to foreign armies, but to an internal refusal to adapt to a changing world. They left behind a map of fractured nations and a warning that when a system stops looking at its own mistakes, time eventually